All right, I got a member request from Jay to watch the original Mad Max. So thanks to Jay for that. If there's anything you want me to review, you can become a member and just put it in a comment or the live chat, and I'll review it. Once a month, I'm trying to limit it to movies or short seasons of TV, or I guess partial seasons, around one anime core length. So let's get into Mad Max. So Mad Max was really jarring to watch this after starting with Fury Road and Furiosa. I had never seen the original three, so Jay told me that he wanted me to watch the original because it was so different. And I expected it to be kind of a 70s version of the new ones, but it is a way different movie than the most recent two. So I didn't realize that the original Mad Max trilogy is kind of a progression into the apocalypse. I actually had to do some reading online to figure out exactly the context for this. And from what I can tell, the movies are pretty disjointed for timelines and world buildings, especially when you include the most recent two. But it seems like this initial movie is kind of on the end of the oil and gas crisis that took place like 50 years ago. And you can see in the movie, people have regular clothes. There's a police force. Max has like a regular house and wife and kid and dog. It's like the beginning of a dystopian world where essentially we're just slowly running out of gas. And people are mostly living normally. But the MFP, which is the main force patrol, which is like the cops in this world, are kind of on even footing with the gangs as far as resources and strength and that sort of thing. It kind of reminds me of like the Wild West in movies where the cops are constantly fighting bad people. So the people generally have stable lives, but it's also not a safe society. This could also be something you could compare to like the 1930s US movies where the prohibition's going on and you have Al Capone and all the big gangsters with their Tommy guns and the police are really struggling to keep them in line. But most of society is still stable, still normal. You just have these elements of violence that are kind of out of control. So as far as the movie itself, overall, I thought it was solid, but very weirdly paced and definitely dated. Like some movies, I think like Jaws holds up from this era. Star Wars obviously holds up. You know, people would say Citizen Kane or whatever hold up. Like some movies do hold up. This one feels very dated, and the writing style is kind of strange. So at the first half of the movie, you're really just getting introduced to the characters and the world. It almost feels a bit disjointed. But then in the second half, it turns into a very clear Max versus the bad guys revenge story. So the pacing for the movie is really strange. And that's actually something that Jay warned me about. It still surprised me though. Because, you know, usually when you talk about older movies, you might say the pacing's a bit slow. Like it takes its time. There's very deliberate. It's not like movies now where they have to have an action scene every 10 minutes. The movie lets itself breathe. And this one, it almost feels like they wanted to focus more on the world for about an hour. And the plot, they're like, yeah, let's just jam it into the second half. It's only an hour and a half movie, super short. It's got really good character stuff too. Let me just give a brief overview of the plot so you understand what I'm talking about if you haven't seen it. So the MFP is struggling to keep these gangs in line. So Mad Max works with the MFP to kind of keep law and order. What we see throughout the movie is pretty dark, actually. I don't know if this was normal for the 70s. These gangs are essentially just going around torturing people, killing them, raping women, very dystopian. It doesn't really shy away from that stuff. So the whole first half of the movie, you're kind of seeing this. You're seeing that people are worried about gas. But for the most part, things are stable, just not super safe. And we see that the leader of one of these groups is called Toe Cutter. And they all have crazy names like that. And you can kind of see why it found its own little niche. It's very kind of eccentric and out there, especially for the time, I would imagine. But Max's colleague arrests one of his men. They use a lawyer to get him off. So there still is, you know, a semblance of society. We see a hospital later on. And partway through the movie, Toe Cutter and Johnny kill Max's best friend / colleague, Goose. This makes Max be like, why the hell am I even doing this? You know, I don't want to put myself in danger like this. It's not really helping anything. I just want to live my life and be happy with my wife and kid. So Max and his wife go on a trip. You can see he's dressed pretty normal here. Totally different than the new movies where it's fully dystopian. And she has a run-in with Toe Cutter and his gang. And one of the guys is a total idiot and tries to throw a chain on her car to catch her. And it just rips his hand off. So Toe Cutter's gang is pissed off, obviously. They track her and Max down to where they're kind of chilling on vacation. And I was pretty surprised by how brutal this all was. I didn't know that the original Mad Max was a revenge story. So I kind of found out the hard way. But in the obvious movie trope, they killed the dog, and then the wife was running holding their baby from the gang, and they ran over her with a motorcycle. So her and the baby both die. Max is obviously super distressed and depressed and doesn't really know what to do with his life. He's kind of a zombie. And this happens like 15 to 20 minutes before the movie ends, which is kind of why I was talking about the pacing being weird. So Max, his whole revenge is kind of just a montage for the most part. But he tracks these people down, starts running them off the road, killing them, going after Toe Cutter and his whole gang, obviously for what they did to his wife and kid and dog. They set up a trap for him. He manages to escape, luckily, because he kills a couple of them, and then the other ones run away. You can see he gets shot. He gets pretty messed up. So he runs them down. And the last one that he comes across is the guy Johnny, who killed Goose. So he handcuffs his ankle to a car, gives him a hacksaw, and then sets up a lighter to where the car is going to blow up in a couple of minutes and says, good luck, you can try to cut your foot off. He drives away, guy blows up behind him, and that's the end. Very strange to get a movie where kind of the impetus for the plot doesn't happen until about halfway through. Like, there are incidents in the first part to kind of demonstrate the world, the characters, the dynamics between them and the gangs. But then the plot is really the last 45 minutes. And in a way, I do kind of wonder if the movie would have been better if the second half of the movie had been kind of the whole movie. Like if we had gotten like 10 to 15 minutes with Goose, you get the setup, see the relationship, he gets killed, Max wants to get away from it, his family gets killed, and then the whole last hour of the movie or 45 minutes is revenge story. Much more drawn out, obviously, but this could just be a kind of a sign of the times that this is how movies were done back then. I can definitely see why this movie found its niche, and I can also see why people who like the original Mad Max movies might not be the biggest fans of the story in Fury Road and Furiosa, where it seems like, from what I can tell, they did some serious retconning. My understanding is that as the movies progress, it gets more apocalyptic, and then Furiosa does something with the timeline where it kind of closes the gap to make Max younger or something like that. I don't exactly know because I just kind of skimmed online because I was so surprised by how different the world was. But I do think the idea of kind of slowly descending into this apocalypse is a good one. Because, most movies wanted to go with the big cataclysmic nuclear war or asteroid, or something like the Maze Runner has the solar flares. So I like the idea of, society just runs out of a resource that's crucial and we just slowly descend into chaos and kind of our primal state again. Also, it's crazy seeing Mel Gibson this young, but when I was looking at the casting, the guy that plays Toe Cutter was recast as Immortan Joe. I don't know if you're supposed to assume later on that he somehow survived or if that's just a completely separate character. I'm assuming it's just a completely separate character because their names and everything are so different, but it was just something that I noticed. But since I don't know all the lore, I don't know if they do the thing where it's like sci-fi so no one's really dead ever. You do see people talk with like robot throat things and stuff in this world. It like kind of has the beginnings of almost like a steampunk post-apocalypse. Like you see how they have the cars that are kind of pimped out for speed and all that. So it's an interesting way to do a franchise. And this was like its own independent thing, is what Jay told me. It's super low budget, its own thing. 2, I think it had a little bit bigger budget, but was still independent. And then it sounds like 3 on is where studios got involved and that whole thing. And then I guess there's comics and video games. I don't know how much of that's canon or even ties in. It seems like a generally cool world, but this movie I don't think would appeal to anyone today who wasn't around in that era to be familiar with movies like this. Like for me, when I think of older movies, I tend to think like 80s and prior. I mean, the 90s movies are starting to feel old too, but generally I feel like 80s and back is kind of where I think like, oh, it's an older movie. And this one, I don't think would appeal to anyone born after 2000, let's say. I don't think they would have the patience for it. All the effects are obviously practical, which is nice to see. I think the effects and stuff are fine. The acting is kind of hit and miss, but I just think the pacing and the way that it's a little bit disjointed and everything's not just spelled out for you. I don't think a lot of young people today, for instance, who might enjoy Fury Road would enjoy this movie. And it's interesting because I feel like if you wanted to remake a movie, instead of Furiosa, it probably should have been this one. Like remake it with whoever you think the next Mel Gibson is. Give it a little bit more modern filming style, dialogue, music. Probably do pretty well. And I think it's the type of thing that can be made for pretty low budget too. I don't know if they would have the balls to go through with, showing the women who've been raped and the dog being tortured to death and the wife getting run over with her baby. That was all pretty rough and really surprised me. Obviously, if you're a reader, this kind of thing happens in books all the time. But I feel like TV tends to hold back. The worst part to me would probably be the music. And I know this is like an era thing and they probably just didn't have any money. So they're just using kind of stock soundtrack, whatever. But it is just very constant throughout the movie with the almost TV style, like mood music. To me, that was like probably the most jarring thing. And then obviously just, when you see the action scenes, there's a million cuts and that sort of thing. It's still a problem today, but I'm sure they had less options back then too. Overall, I thought it was a pretty solid movie, especially for the era that it came out in. So I'm really enjoying these recommendations. I think so far you guys have used all the recommendations on stuff that I probably wouldn't have watched on my own. And I've enjoyed everything so far. Like Avatar, I probably wouldn't have watched just because, it's a kid's show. Plastic Memories, I knew was sad, so I was kind of putting that off. And then Mad Max, I think is just from a different era. So I don't know if I would have bothered to watch it. Thanks for the recommendations. Obviously, thanks for being members. If you're still here, like and subscribe and all that. Thanks. See ya.